Chris, welcome. Great, good to have you here as well. Any thoughts, opening remarks for you before we get into our conversation?
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate the invitation to be here. Retired from the FBI after 26 years, about a year and a half ago. And now I'm the Chief Security Officer for Phillips 66, and I've been there about a year and a half, down at the Energy Corridor. The FBI, I would say this, right? Let's get the bad out of the way. We've been taking a beating in the press the last couple of years, and I like to sum it up in this way, and hopefully it relates to everybody and dampens down some of the egg throwing that I may receive here. I always say there's about 20 people in the FBI who did some bad things and made some really poor judgment mistakes, and they should be held accountable for that. But the other 36,000 of us were out there saving children, stopping terrorists, investigating corrupt public officials. And I wish that was the narrative that was out there, as opposed to the vitriol that you hear today. Because the FBI is made up of good Americans who are trying to do our best, and it hurts all of us when we see that. So let's get that out of the way right now. So, I'll tell you the good work that we did, and kind of a joke, like literally every bad thing that happened in the last 20 years, I was there. So you may not want to be here tonight, to be quite honest with you. Wherever I went, really bad things happened. So we'll talk about some of those, but I'm more than happy to take anybody's questions, good or bad. I think the only way to clear the air about the Bureau is to have an honest conversation about what happened, what's going on, and I think there's some good people that are really trying to fix it. I'm trying to fix it from the outside, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to come tonight and talk. And I think we do a very bad job in the Bureau of getting the good stories out and telling how we do protect this country. And we need to get more of that narrative out, not just the bad stories. So hopefully we'll give you a balanced approach to what you're hearing on TV.
Welcome, good to have you. So for the audience, we'll talk a little about the FBI, about the mission and the purpose why the FBI exists. I know 9/11 is right around the corner, just a few weeks out, so I think that'll be kind of the highlight of our discussion today, and definitely what the 9/11 meant, and really what the changes introduced and what it has meant for the Bureau, again, its mission, and kind of what the priorities might be now. And here in Greater Houston, again, knowing your experience as well. From the FBI website, I quote, "The mission of the FBI is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States." Chris, if we could give you a brief overview, perhaps from your perspective, and talk about other organizations that are in that sphere of national security, in short version of what you do differently than others, perhaps.
Sure, and since it's the World Affairs Council, I get a lot of questions. Hey, what's the difference between the FBI and CIA or NSA, or name your three-letter acronym? I think the real way to look at it is the FBI is very unique in the world, where the FBI is a law enforcement agency, but it's also a national security agency. And when you look at other countries like Great Britain, Canada, Australia, those are divided services, where MI5 and MI6, right? The Canadians, you have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who have the best uniforms by far of anyone. Yes. But then you have something called CISIS, right? Where their law enforcement rests in one authority, and their national security intelligence collection is in another one. And I've been all around the world, I've worked with those partners, and they've all said this is the right model, because what it allows is the FBI to investigate crimes and then present them for prosecution. It also allows us to do the national security work and then decide, do we prosecute that, or is it just an intelligence gathering operation? Where in those other countries, they have a lot of problems, because the Royal Canadian Mounted Police will investigate a crime, and then at a certain point, they have to stop, and then they turn it over to their intelligence agency, and vice versa. And it's very clunky. There's competition, and with the FBI, the way it's set up, it allows us to go both ways, depending on where the facts are taken in. So that's the difference between us and like what we do. So CIA, right, their main focus is overseas. It's collection of intelligence. It's producing intelligence for the decision makers. They don't operate in the country without the authority of the FBI, and they have to work with us in country. which I think is good. And then overseas, right, we work overseas as well, but a lot of that work overseas is, again, a law enforcement function, which the agency does not get involved with. But if we're operating overseas for a national security intelligence capacity, then we have to coordinate with them. So there's kind of some lines there in the road. You know, NSA, they're a collector. A lot of other agencies are collectors, where we can collect and then we actually execute domestically on that collection. So that there's just kind of some of the lanes in the road there. As far as the FBI goes, the number one priority in the FBI is counterterrorism. Now that threat is changing. It's not what it was 20 years ago, but it's still there. And even though the threat from Al-Qaeda and ISIS has dramatically decreased, and I would say because of a lot of hard work of all the intelligence communities, to include the FBI, that's still number one because that is an immediate threat to life and safety. And like when I was at FBI San Antonio, like every day there was a discussion, what are the terrorism threats today? What are we doing? What are the resources we're putting against that? Because that's a no-fail mission. Because we miss that, people die, which is not to be melodramatic, but it's factual. So we were always working that, always pushing that. And I know there's a lot of discussion now about domestic terrorism. What does that mean? You know, domestic terrorism is just a group that's in the United States, kind of homegrown here, but they're doing the same things, right? Whether it's ISIS or it's domestic terrorism, their goal is to kill people, and we're going to do everything possible to stop that. So that is the number one priority of the FBI.
I have a question. Who is here some way associated, maybe in the role like I did, Citizens Academy, or maybe perhaps former employees? Can you raise your hand? That's it? And
I did DEA.
Okay, that's great.
DEA is wrong place, I'm sorry. They're
I
next
know,
door.
they're the
Next
other
door.
one, okay. But
Just
that's the only
kidding.
one I
Thank
know.
you.
We got one retired FBI agent, so I got a chance to talk to
Yeah.
him, so thank you, sir, for serving.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Kind of bring out a little bit the other hat that I wear. I mentioned earlier, the Citizens Academy, and Roseburg earlier too, that you're a big supporter. That's the role that we play. Can I score some routing points of my association?
Sure, absolutely.
Too?
So the FBI has a wonderful program. It's called the Citizens Academy, where they invite members of the community in to take a 8-week course on what the FBI does. And what it is we reach out to community leaders, business leaders, faith leaders, people in the community to really become ambassadors of the FBI and to kind of go out there and say, hey, this is what's really going on. So I would encourage everybody here, if you fit some of those bills, talk to FBI Houston, talk to you, and see what it takes to get accepted. Not everybody gets accepted. I'm not sure everybody in this room is going to get accepted. But it's a worthwhile program. It's one night a week for 8 weeks, and it really gives you an inside look as to what the FBI does. It's a wonderful program.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and go straight into some of the
Right.
conversations. I see from your bio, you joined the FBI Washington, D.C. field office 1996, very early in your career. You were there till 2012, quite a long time. And the last 2 years, you became the acting special agent in charge for that office. And I'm really, again, importance of September 11th coming up. I want to go ahead and jump kind of right straight into the conversation because a lot of it will pivot of what happened on that day and what is still, as you incorporated in the organization and, going further. So let's talk about a little bit of a day of September 11th. Evelyn, are you here? Sorry, jumping in. Evelyn, you mentioned she's our COS, Community Outreach Specialist for the agency, and you mentioned you were also at September 11th in DC or at Pentagon?
I was at, New York City.
Okay, so, yeah, thank you for that too. So let's go ahead and jump straight into September 11th. What was your day like? Why were you in DC? What were you doing? What was your role? And what happened, kind of maybe the run of the show for the day and kind of going
Sure.
further?
So in Washington, D.C., obviously it's the nation's capital. The FBI has a special counterterrorism team that I was on. I was a member of that team. And our job was anything that happened in the city that we thought might have been terrorism, we would rapidly respond to, kind of get the scene set up, start an investigation, and figure out where we had to go. So that was my role on 9/11. And interesting enough, nobody remembers. It's funny how what people don't remember because it's so long ago. But coming up to 9/11, there was great concern in Washington, D.C., because if you remember, if you know this, the IMF and World Bank, world headquarters is in Washington. And they were gonna have meetings at the end of September, which all the intelligence told us were gonna be riots. There was people coming in with weapons, Molotov cocktails, it was horrible. It was kind of, remember the Seattle IMF meeting where they destroyed half of Seattle? That was coming to Washington. It was actually the best thing that ever happened, because it made all the agencies get together, plan, train, how we're gonna deal with this catastrophe that was coming the end of September. So really, we were about as high-trained, ready to go as any other time when that happened. So actually that morning, I was training local police and fire departments to get ready for the end of September. So I was with all them. And obviously, the World Trade Center happened first, we saw that, and then I got alerted that, hey, be ready for immediate deployment to New York. So I was actually on the way back to the building to grab all of our gear, because we then said, you're getting deployed to New York. So I was on the way back to the FBI Washington field office to get all my gear to deploy, when I didn't see it, which is important in the conversation. All of a sudden the Pentagon exploded, and we heard the police, because we used to monitor the police radios, and I'll never forget the guy who came on the radio, he declared an urgent, which means all comms stop. And he said, urgent, I don't know what just happened, the Pentagon just exploded. So then I deviated, and then I called that into the FBI to say, hey, urgent, Pentagon just exploded, send the Joint Terrorism Task Force, send the terrorism team. So I got to the Pentagon in 6 minutes after the plane hit. And you can imagine the pandemonium. For those of you that have been in DC, the Pentagon's the world's largest office building. I literally drove off the highway, and there were thousands of people running out, so I couldn't drive my police cruiser any further. So I literally just parked the car on the side of the road and abandoned my car, and I ran in the rest of the way. And then when we got there to where the side of the building where it occurred, we didn't know what happened. I didn't know if it was a plane, a truck bomb. Like originally we were told, hey, we got truck bombed. And it looked like that because when the plane hit the Pentagon, I hate to say it, but it was a perfect landing. They came in and he hit the Pentagon on the first floor without hitting the ground, and then that plane drove through the building. So when we got there and you looked at the Pentagon, like all you saw were like broken windows, like it wasn't collapsed yet. So we were like, what happened? It has to be a truck bomb. But I'll never forget the heat. Like the heat was unbearable. And again, I used to be a firefighter, so I'm standing there and I was like, truck bombs don't have heat. Like, why am I feeling this heat? It doesn't make sense. And again, you gotta, like, to put yourself in that, like your mind doesn't catch up. And I'm sure some of the military people, like when bad things really happen fast, it's really hard for your mind to catch up as to what's going on. So I was standing there like, why do we have this heat? I don't understand it, what's going on? And it took us about 20 minutes to actually figure out that it was a plane that hit the building. Like first reports were, hey, it was a prop plane, it was a twin engine plane, and then finally we got to, hey, that was a commercial airliner that hit the building. So the first rule was to set up command. It worked flawlessly. We got together with the fire, the local police, we set up command, and then we were there for 17 days managing that. Another weird thing about that day is, so like New York is out of your mind, because I got my own problems. So I had no idea what was happening in New York. I didn't know what happened in New York till about 2:30 that afternoon, when I was walking through a command vehicle that the FBI had, and they were playing the collapse in New York, and I was like, hey, what the heck is that? And I'll never forget the poor guy sitting there looks at me and he's like, don't you know what happened? I said, I've been a little busy. I haven't been watching TV, right? And then he told me. And that was problematic, just to give you a little personal story. So I'm a good Irish Catholic kid from New York, which means you don't have a choice in life. You're a cop or you're a fireman, right? That's the family business. So everyone in my family is FDNY or NYPD. So I knew, like I had family there. And they'd seen those buildings come down. You knew that it was not going to be good. And then my sister called me when the phones kind of lit up. And so I ended up losing 2 of my cousins got killed at 9/11. And I say that because, you know, those FDNY guys, you know, the heroism of running into that building, because they knew, there's no question, they knew that they weren't coming out of that building. So that was tough. The question was really like, how many guys are dead? Like, we knew it, right? Yeah, it was, you know, so you're trying to do your job, you're thinking about the family, you know, hey, we're gonna lose people. And then for 17 days, we worked that scene with the Pentagon to figure out, like, who was on the airplane, how did they do the hijacking? Like, how did this happen? And we ended up going 12-hour shifts, working through it. But also during 9/11, there's so many other things that were going on. Obviously, the full FBI ramps up. We had a hijacked airport at Dulles. One of the planes took off from Dulles. So the FBI kind of took over Dulles Airport to try to figure that out. Are there more planes? We really thought we were going to get hit again. I know now people look back and they say, hey, the FBI was a little too aggressive after 9/11. We did a lot of things that, looking back, you could probably say, boy, that's on the line, but again, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback. I can tell you on September 11th, September 12th, like, we thought we were getting hit again. Like, we all thought we were getting hit, and we were ready. Yeah, we were taking things down and locking people up and doing a lot of things to protect the country. And I think it's somewhat disingenuous to look back and say, why would you do that? Well, I wouldn't do it today, but in that environment, when you had those kind of threats and you just lost 3,000 people, you have to be careful. Because I can't imagine we had another plane hit a building, like, then we'd be in front of Congress, like, how could you not have done this, right? So it's a difficult line and some of the difficult decisions we made.
Yeah, and I'll leave that with you for a process it a little bit as well, and we can pick it up again in a Q&A session as well. I'm sure you have many, many questions on the day and, you know, after that. And I mentioned earlier that changed all of our lives. I think all of us remember what we were doing that day for sure. But I think also changed, as I mentioned, FBI and so many other security-related organizations. Can you speak maybe a little bit about how that focus priorities changed?
Sure. Yeah, you know, I think a lot of people think we weren't working terrorism before 9/11, which isn't true. So the difference is, at Washington FBI, we had 4 terrorism squads on September 10th. On September 12th, we had 12. So that's what happened. We were working it before. We were going overseas to terrorism events. Like, we were working it. In fact, we all knew bin Laden was the bad guy. So a lot of people think that he came out of nowhere. He didn't come out of nowhere. My first day on this terrorism team was the day that they blew up the 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, if you remember that, in 1998. It was my first day. I showed up. Literally, they're all running out the door. The boss looks at me and goes, hey, you're the first new guy. You stay here and man the radios. And I was like, what? And then they all went. So I did not get to go to the embassy bombings, but everybody that I worked with did. You know, we did that. We went to the Cole bombing. If you remember the USS Cole that got blown up in Yemen. That was bin Laden. Like, everybody knew bin Laden was the bad guy. In fact, I can tell you that the summer of 2001, we all knew something big was coming. And we were on hair alert to go overseas because we thought they were going to hit an embassy or a U.S. interest overseas. We knew that, and we were ready to go. We never in a million years did anybody think it was going to be a target in the U.S. the way that it was. And you could see, you know, the 9/11 Commission came out and said that was a failure of imagination. Well, guilty, right? That's true. Never happened before. We didn't think it was going to happen. We were really focused overseas. Like, we were packed, ready to go. And then when it happened in country, like, it shocked the whole system. And it changed everything. But I don't want you to think we weren't working that before 9/11.
Kind of more of a today questions you mentioned already, the Middle East, of course, but we have some bad actors, China, Russia, and there are big topics such as domestic terrorism, and of course there's the whole cyber space. Any comments for you on that? I think so. We can spend 3 hours just talking about that.
Hey, I got no money. I got nowhere to go.
You have 3 minutes.
I got 3, oh my gosh, okay.
No, I'm just saying.
So I would say to that, which is important to this group, you know, the biggest threat today is China, right? And the problem is this. You have a near-peer country who is not a friend of ours, who is trying to surpass the United States. Well, I don't blame them. Like, everybody wants to be number one. If you're not trying to be number one, what are you doing, right? So China is doing everything possible to be number one. Now, the problem for us is this. They don't play by the same rules that we play by, and they're beating us. They are cleaning our clocks because they're hitting us every way they can. They're hitting us with cyber warfare. They're hitting us with industrial espionage to steal all of our companies' secrets. And I'm not just talking about national defense companies. This isn't about just stealing plans for fighter jets and aircraft carriers. It's about stealing plans for, how is Champion X drilling so efficiently? We're going to steal their drill bits. Name the company, how are they doing something so well? We're going to steal their technology because they spent $3 billion to develop it. I'm going to steal it, and then I'm going to beat them on the world marketplace. The United States does not do that. The U.S. intelligence community does not spy for the benefit of our companies. I can tell you that as a fact, where theirs does. So you may be Phillips 66 or Champion X, and you have really good internal controls, but I can't beat the Chinese industrial intelligence community. There's no way, right? So they're doing that. They have spies that are here. They're recruiting everybody they can. And what they also do, which again, we would say this is wrong, they have good people who get out of China and come to America because this is the land of the free. But then the Chinese government exerts influence on them to say, hey, your grandparents are still in China. If you don't work for us, your grandfather just lost his job, and we're going to throw them out of their house. So they make people that are here work for them. And that's wrong. And we had a huge case in the FBI where Chinese exiles who came to America to be free, China actually sent their version of the FBI to the United States to grab these people and make them go back to China. And if you don't go back to China, we're going to kill your family. Like, that's the game they play. We don't play that. So, like, when you take all of that together, we can't defeat them the way we're playing it today. And it's crushing us. It's crushing our businesses. It's crushing our national defense. The American people have no idea how bad it is. It's as bad as you think it is times 3, without getting classified and me going to jail. So.
Not today, not on my watch. I'm gonna just one more question left because I really want to open this to all of you to engage with you best. While you think about your questions, again, as Ronan mentioned, you can write them, but it's quite okay. Just raise your hand and speak up, and Chris, I'm sure, will take your question. Kind of bring it back here to Texas, the role that you retired from officially from BI, as special agent in charge for San Antonio. Could you speak to some priorities or things that you're seeing, obviously, where we are, where we live, who we border, and what that means for us?
Sure, and to explain that to the Texas audience, so the way the FBI works is you have field offices through the country. So there's an FBI Houston, which has a special agent in charge who's really focused Houston City. FBI San Antonio, so I was in charge of FBI San Antonio, and my territory went from Waco all the way down to the border. So it was massive. I was the second largest FBI office. So it went from Waco to the border, from Brownsville on the coast, all the way out to Big Bend, which is actually 1/3 of the entire U.S.-Mexican border was my responsibility. So obviously that's not going well. I don't think I think the reason I stayed so long is that nobody else actually wanted the job. So it's kind of interesting. So I was the special agent in charge for 8 years, which was wonderful. I got the record for the longest serving SAC. I think in Houston they change every like 18 months. Or maybe they would like leave Combs down there, I don't know. But really the big things in Texas that we were worried about, number one was China. Like, I had to turn, all of my intelligence assets were singularly focused on China. Not on Russia, not on Iran, China, because it was so much. So that was that. With the terrorism, the really big threat that we were working literally every day was active shooters. Now that's not necessarily a terrorism event. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So the attitude of the FBI was so many people are dying in these, and enough of them are actually federal crimes that we were going to go after that. So just for the record, about 95% of all active shooters are not federal crimes. It's a state crime, it's a murder.
Right.
The only time an active shooter becomes a federal crime is if there's a terrorism link, like I did it in the name of ISIS, or it's a civil rights matter. I killed those people because they're X, whatever X is, right? Because they're black, Hispanic, gay, like go down the list. Then you get into civil rights crimes. That's an FBI jurisdiction. So the FBI responds to all active shooters immediately to save life. Once that is done, then it's, okay, is it a state crime, is it a federal crime? You can usually figure that out in about 5 minutes. It's not like on TV where we're fighting on the front lawn, right? And then you decide that. So I was the, if you remember the Sutherland Springs Church massacre, so I was in charge of that for the FBI. So we responded, we rolled 80 FBI agents immediately to that. Well, we got there literally within 5 minutes on the lawn with the Texas Rangers, who were great partners of ours. I went up to the head ranger and I was like, hey, what do you got? Because we're never first. He's like, Chris, this is what we got. The guy went to church here. You know, he had a lot of issues. Like, we think this is a mental person who decided to commit an active shooter. I was like, okay, that's a state crime. You're in charge. What can I do to help you? And then what I would say to all the chiefs is, listen, this is your scene. Let me put the $9 billion budget of the FBI behind you to solve this problem. And then we would bring in our bomb techs and our evidence teams and all of our specialties, and that's how we work that. So active shooter, we were stopping 5 times more than actually happened. There was a period of time in San Antonio where in the course of 4 months, we stopped 4 active shooters that nobody ever heard about. So we did that all the time. Thank you. We trying hard. And then with the border, right, obviously the border is a big concern. And again, to put the spotlight on the truth, because, hey, both sides are wrong, right? I always say the truth is always in the middle.
Yeah.
So whatever you're watching or reading, I want you to read the other side and then draw a line in the middle, because that's really where the truth lies. Everybody's lying to you. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Know that.
here's the problem with the border, right? And the problem with the border is it's overwhelming. The Border Patrol is completely overwhelmed. Those are great men and women trying to do the right thing. The problem, nobody's against migration. Nobody's against the people that are trying to come here to better themselves. Like I said, I'm an Irish kid from New York. My people came over on a boat from Ireland to Ellis Island. Like, I know that for a fact. The problem is this: it's completely uncontrolled, right? Ellis Island, everybody came, you had to go to Ellis Island, and they checked you out. If we could do that, I think every law enforcement agency would say that's great. The problem is, nobody's getting checked. There's so many. Border Patrol is completely overwhelmed. So, you know, if you're talking about South and Central Americans trying to find a better way of life, that's great. But you got a lot of MS-13 in there. We should be doing checks on that. We should be fingerprinting people. We should be running backgrounds. This whole issue of the federal government taking children away from their parents. I'm going to tell you the truth behind that. There's a lot of 20-year-old men bringing little girls with them across the border. And we cannot prove that that is a family member. That's the ugly truth of what's going on there. Not all the time, but enough to really cause a concern. And then, like, Border Patrol is trying to do rapid DNA tests to see, is this man related to this girl? And a lot of times they are not. They are then separated. So are there children in detention centers by themselves with no adults? Yes, there are. Because they couldn't prove, Border Patrol, that that girl should be with that man. I think that's a worthy operation there, right? The other problem is this. It's not just South and Central American people looking for a new life. Can anyone explain to me how 900 Chinese citizens show up at Laredo, Texas, coming across the Mexican border? How does that happen?
Yeah.
China controls everything in that country. 900 people don't get out and show up at Laredo, right? How do 8 men from Afghanistan show up in Brownsville, Texas at the border, unaided by anyone? You gotta look into that. So the issues for us in law enforcement, and I speak broadly, FBI, Border Patrol, whoever, is we just gotta check this out. Like, who are these people? How did they get here? How does a guy from Somalia end up in Del Rio, Texas?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. You can't be a poor farmer from Somalia and afford to get to Del Rio, Texas. I don't think I could afford to fly to Somalia today, right? Like, how does this happen? So our issue is, we gotta go through this. Like, who are these people? And if they're good people trying to improve their lives, God bless them. Let them in. But there's no checks being done, and that's what concerns us. And what concerned me as the FBI head in San Antonio is, like, what if 3 guys cross the border and they get to McAllen and they build a truck bomb and then they blow up City Hall in McAllen? Because you know what's gonna happen then? Then Chris Combs is gonna be in front of Congress and they're gonna look at me and say, how did you let this happen? Right? I mean, it's one of the reasons why I retired, because I was just like, oh my God, like, I'm living day to day here. On any given day, I'm gonna be in front of Congress and I'm gonna be the bad guy, because I can't explain how 4 guys crossed the border and blew up the State House in Austin. So that's the real issue there. And it's not clean and it's dirty, but unfortunately, neither side is really sitting down to address the real things. How can we make this better and safer? And that's what we all wish, like an honest conversation on it.
Thank you for some questions already, and I'll go through this, but you and I spoke right before we started the discussion about actually the cancer FBI agency. You wanted me to remind you on that too.
Just real back on to 9/11, because nobody knows about this either. So I think a lot of people have heard about the 9/11 cancer and how many people are getting sick and dying, right? So I want to tell you that as of last week, when we lost another guy, the FBI has lost 20 FBI agents who have died from exposure on 9/11. Like, nobody knows about that. Nobody talks about it. 10 of those were friends of mine. Like, if you were at the Pentagon, and it's more at the Pentagon than at the World Trade Center and at Shanksville. But it's a real problem. The FBI agents are dying still. I gotta be honest with you, every day that I feel a weird pain, it kind of concerns me, because I was there for 17 days, you know? You look at New York City, like FDNY, like everybody knows they lost 343 firemen recently, within the last 3 months, I think it was. They've now lost more firemen to the 9/11 cancer than they did on 9/11 itself.
Yeah.
So it's still moving out. So it's a big problem, and unfortunately, if you got it, and there's nothing you're gonna do, you're gonna die. You can prolong it, right? But there's no coming back from it. So it's a big issue that I'm not sure everybody knows about.
Thank you. So one of the questions is actually talking about the increased drone activity that we are witnessing in different parts of the world, and what your comments are for the domestic risk and foreign drone perhaps coming in.
Yeah, drones are a big problem, to be honest. I mean, there's good and there's bad, right? I'm not gonna, but the concern about the drones is anybody with very little skill set can take a drone, modify it to carry an explosive device. It's not that hard, right? And then there's not really good technology in defense of drones. And in fact, and I think this is kind of wrong, if somebody's flying a drone over your house, like it's actually illegal for you to knock it out of the sky. Which I think if it's over your house, you should have some ability to do that.
Right.
But it's a big issue, and you know, like everything else with the government is slow, right? Technology is fast, so the ability of drones they're so far faster than the government's laws coming up behind them. It's a big problem. And like you've seen in Ukraine, like Ukraine's buying commercial drones and taking out Russian tanks. Well, you could do that here.
Sure.
So there's a real threat there, but I'm not sure the right answer how you get around that, but it's very concerning.
Eric, our teacher from, asking a question about or starting with a comment that Chinese consulate was closed here in Houston a few years ago, and if you can speak to a bit FBI's involvement in investigations like that.
Boy, now you're getting into me going to jail.
I'm not accusing you of burning it down or anything.
Right. So what I would say this, so the FBI got it shut down.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the FBI determined that there was so much illegal activity coming out of that establishment that it wasn't serving the true diplomatic nature of why it was there. So any country at any time can shut down another country's embassies or consulates, right? We also, the FBI shut down the Russian consulate in San Francisco, actually before we shut down the Chinese consulate here. And what it's based on is the illegal activity that we have to prove to State Department. It's not like the FBI just makes a phone call, like this takes years.
Yeah.
So we have to prove to State Department, to the White House, because obviously that's a really big deal, that hey, this is why we believe this consulate should be closed. And these are examples of the illegal activity that we're seeing. And I can tell you that there was substantial illegal activity that we felt was coming out of there that was harming national security. Whew, did I get
Yep.
So I actually have a couple of questions, but I did mention that you can also ask questions. So if you have one, why don't you just stand up and state your name and the question?
Billy D. Jellin. Like what? Tell us something.
Something.
You're just teasing us. and putting
I'm
us
sorry, I
off.
cannot speak to what you may or may not be talking about. Well, I mean, obviously, it's espionage. It's espionage.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Whether that's industrial espionage or a nation's, like, what is it? It's somewhat immaterial. I mean, whether you're stealing my plans for the joint fighter or you're stealing, how Champion X makes drill bits. I mean, you're hurting America.
Yeah.
So that, it relates to that.
Thank you.
Did I see another? Yeah, I saw another hand.
Yeah, Agent Tom, thank you for coming, really enjoy it. We all, well, most of us, some of us aren't old enough. We remember planes being hijacked to go to Cuba.
Yeah.
Many years ago. And that was happening. And so the idea that somebody could take a plane, they were just trying to escape. They were trying to get to Cuba. But still, the idea that somebody could commandeer a plane somehow, okay. And then the other thing, which I know there are places to learn how to fly all over the country. And one of those places was in Norman, Oklahoma, where I'm from. And we've lived down here for 40 years. But anyway, where the student went in and learned how to fly, and he was there at 9/11. And I know, how on earth do you forethink all this to get words out to people that are training people to fly? If they say something like, all I want to do is learn how to take off. And they say, I don't need to learn how to land. Well, I mean, hello, what on earth does this blankety blank have in mind? And so I don't know, if there's any way for those guys that did learn how to fly in our country. I mean, they could have come over here and already been pilots.
They did not. They learned here.
They went here, yeah.
So there's a couple issues there. Unfortunately, not everybody is as bright as you are. So, seriously, yes, some people heard those comments and didn't say anything. Some people did, right? And the FBI wrote a memo out of Phoenix that said, hey, something weird's going on. I just talked to a flight guy who said this guy just wanted to learn how to fly planes and not land. Hindsight's 20/20, right? But that gets to FBI headquarters, and there's a couple of problems, right? And just because I'm being honest, when you write a memo that says, hey, I'm concerned there's Middle Eastern men who are wanting to fly airplanes and not land, you gotta be careful. And the FBI was like, oh, we're not gonna go out and grab every Middle Eastern man that's profiled, okay? So that slows it down. Then you gotta look into this. Is this one guy? And they started investigating that, right? And unfortunately, that takes time. So, yes, there's no more hijackings because the security system is pretty robust. They figured out how to defeat the system. I know how they defeated the system. And no, I can't tell you, because that's secret. But they studied it, they figured out how to get around it, and they did it. So there's a lot of tripwires there, and I'm not saying like certain things shouldn't have been caught, but it's a little more difficult. I can tell you this, because I was involved with this, after 9/11, we went out to every scuba store, scuba training in America, because there was a report that there were Middle Eastern men going to scuba shops, taking lessons like well above average. And then we had intel coming in from overseas that said, hey, they're talking about a waterborne assault. So we went, oh my God, we're not doing this again. We're going to go out and go to every scuba shop in America. And I can tell you that a lot of those scuba shops refused to cooperate with the FBI because they felt we were profiling. So that's after 9/11. So it's not as easy. I appreciate what you're saying, but I remember that scuba shop thing, and we were there scratching our heads like, oh my God, we just went through this, and look what happened, and I can't get people to cooperate.
Well, I understand it's total easy to be a money
Right, but that's,
quarterback. You
and
know?
I'll give you another story, like, hey, we all, God, talk about getting fired. Well, I remember, I'm already out of the bureau, what are they gonna do, right? Like the whole issue with weapons and guns. Way early in my career, I used to work Russian KGB agents. I went to a gun store because a Russian KGB agent kept going to this gun store. So I walked in there, fat, dumb, and happy, and said, hey, can I talk to the owner? And the guy came out, and I said, hey, I'm FBI. Hey, I'd like to ask you some questions. You got this Russian guy who keeps coming in here. I work counterintelligence. Will you talk to me? And the guy called me a jackbooted thug and said, what are you doing trying to look up people who own weapons? And I was like, hey, I'm not asking about Americans. I'm asking about a Russian spy. Like, I'm not trying to infringe anybody's Second Amendment rights. And it got pretty ugly. And I realized I was heavily outgunned. And I decided I'm leaving. And I got the hell out of there. So, like, it's not as easy as it looks, but those are just some examples from me. Like, really? I'm asking a gun store owner about a KGB guy? Like, he's not going to cooperate? I thought we were all about the Second Amendment and flying flags. And I got run out of there, man. It was ugly. So it doesn't work sometimes the way you think it would.
I think we actually have a question from,
I have a two-part question. You mentioned through that the FBI is, was preparing for an event. Thinking about, the world through, would the FBI be involved through, or would the CIA be involved with similar people within the G7 group when it comes to like a threat to World War III, where you have, North Korea, China, or Russia, attacking through?
So I would say, like, post 9/11, the agencies cooperate a heck of a lot better. But before 9/11, hey, there was a lot of, everybody's fighting about budget, FBI and CIA didn't really talk, that's all true. I would say today it's a completely different picture, which I think is a positive that came out of 9/11. Like, the FBI and the CIA are much closer, really Team America, not silos, right? So I would say, like, in a nation-state threat, whether it be China or Russia, Iran, we cooperate extensively on trading information. Now, CIA's overseas collecting information, we're collecting it domestically, but it's a team effort. And when you get to the White House level, right, the FBI's throwing on the table like, hey, this is what we're collecting in country, this is what we think Russia's up to. CIA throws what they got, NSA throws in, right? So then you get a much better picture globally of what's going on as opposed to people not sharing. So I am confident. When I saw, as we got ramped up, I was still in when Russia was going in Ukraine. Like, that was a community-wide effort. Like, we were going out, what is Russia gonna do? CIA was doing that overseas and really had a nice, we knew that was coming. Everybody knew that was coming because we had the intel that said it was gonna come.
thank you. I think we had a question here, and then I'll come to you.
I have a question. My name is Kiki Koimarianos. I'm Greek. So you know what is happening in Greece, right? We have all these men, right now, it started with Syria, they were refugees. For the last 5-6 years, people come, like you said, Afghanistan, Pakistan, there's no war over there, right? The boats are full of men, and Greece has islands, we cannot close them. They get on the boat from Turkey, they come over, fine. So, why does the US don't build the wall? They can build it, they have a border that they can close, right? And then, yes, you can identify who comes in, and, you know, you vet them. I am a product of immigration. My mom came in New York in 1965, but through the legal channels. So I agree, nobody's against immigration, but we want legal immigrants because the crime, I don't know if anybody follows the European countries. Look what is happening in England, in France, in Greece, in Italy. It's out of control, and it's coming here too, just the media doesn't show it, you know, because it's not nice to tell people the truth. And of course, you know, you are racist when you bring it up.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Gotta think about this. No, so we can build a wall. It's not a question of ability or capability. We can. The decision was made to stop. And again, this is not an FBI specialty, but I will speak for the Border Patrol with their permission, because I work so closely with them. We don't need a border sea to shining sea. They need a border in certain spots to push the immigrants to a location where they can manage them. So that's what Border Patrol wanted. They don't want a wall sea to shining sea. But they need to, they gotta control it because they cannot control it right now. So you can do it. A political decision was made to stop it. And I don't even know if they had the right facts when they made that decision, because it's so politicized. I don't know if anybody knows the truth anymore, on either side, to be quite honest with you. So I think Border Patrol would say, we need it in certain places, push people here, we can manage it, we can check them, and we can let them in, which we are okay with. But we really need to check who's coming in. Because again, like El Salvador, they have a tremendous MS-13 problem.
Yes.
We have a database. We work with El Salvador. Their fingerprints are in the US database. We could print every male coming in to say, are they a good man who's never been in trouble in El Salvador? Or do they have 3 murder convictions? Like, we can do that today, but only if we see that man. And the problem is we're not seeing him.
I think you have a question as well.
My question is, I was stationed in Washington DC 1982 through 1986, veteran United States Navy, and what I can never figure out is how in the most protected airspace in the United States, how was a plane able to plow through the Pentagon? That's my question.
So, it's a good question. I would say you have to think of this, right? Even today, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna shoot down a 737 over Northern Virginia? Because if you shoot it down, it's gonna come down somewhere. And is it gonna land on a school or a church or a synagogue? So that's part of the problem with air defense in DC. Could you shoot down every plane that violates it? You could, but it's gonna land. And that was a problem we had. Like, with those debates, because people violate that airspace, they scrambled the jets. Like, short of you tracking right to the White House, I'm not sure anybody gets shot. I can't imagine who would say shoot that plane down.
So they couldn't make any evasive maneuvers? I mean, were the jets there to
No,
intercept?
no, there were not.
That's what I'm trying to
So
say. There was
before
no-
9/11, I can tell you, there are not jets waiting to lift off throughout the country. They're not. Now, post 9/11, it's a lot more advanced. But like pre 9/11, there are not jets circling DC. There's not. And today there isn't, to be quite honest with you. Now they're in the area and they can go up and they're under, I don't know, very limited time to get in the air. But I don't know what they would do. Like, I don't think anybody shoots down a commercial airliner in this country. I just can't see it. Who's gonna make that decision? I just can't see that ever happening.
So I think we're almost, or are we out of time? I'm watching.
Someone's waving frantically back there.
Way up there, and then we'll have one question, I'll close with you.
So relating back to the border, to what extent do you think the cartel is taking advantage of that confusion?
100%. So I can tell you this. So the cartel controls Mexico. There's no question. They control Mexico. Every person that crosses the border has to pay a transportation fee to the cartel, to the point that when you get to the border area, you pay the cartel. When I left, it was $7,000 a person, depending on who you are. They charge the Chinese more because they have more money. So, no kidding. There's a fee based on where you're from. And if you're really bad, it goes higher than that. Like if they know you're bad, it's a higher price. So for the average poor person from Honduras who's trying to get in, it's $7,000. And then you would get one of those rubber bracelets. You know the kids wear those rubber bracelets? I don't know what they're called. But you would get a yellow, back then it was yellow, I'm sure they changed it. You get a yellow bracelet. And then you were smuggled in, however they did it, okay? If you were thrown out of the country, like, so if the US actually caught you and we decided, hey, you're getting deported, the cartel is waiting where we would send them back to Mexico, and if you came back without a yellow bracelet, they'd kill you, because you didn't pay the fine. Now, if you came back with the yellow bracelet, you got another free chance to get across the border. Because they offer you, it was either 2 or 3 shots. We'll get you in, it may take 2 or 3. But if you don't have that yellow band, they're gonna kill you. So every person that's come, think of the numbers. When they release the numbers, how many? Times that by 7,000, that's how much money the cartel was making. There was a period of time they were making more money on people than they were on moving drugs. The drugs actually came down because the people came up. They switched the business model because it's all about money. It's all about money. So we're making the cartels rich is what's going on right now. And the cartel, like the human trafficking of women for sex it's off the charts. So they're taking advantage of that. So again, this is not just poor people coming to America. God bless them. We've encouraged 7,000 a head to the cartel. The sex trafficking is obscene. And there's a host of other things that the cartel's making. It's a money-making machine. And that's what's going on.
I know there's a lot more other questions. You said you might have time to stay behind. You choose to a little bit.
I got nothing to, I live here by myself. I got nothing to do. So.
So others might have responsibilities.
Somebody wants to take me to dinner, I might even be open for that.
And the highest bid for the fundraising is still
Again,
price.
what's my cut out of this? I'm really interested in this.
So I'll close with that last question. Go ahead.
There's been some talk in Congress about declaring the cartels as terrorist organizations. Is that, in your view, is that a plus or minus? Is that a good idea? I mean,
So there's 2 sides to that, right? There's good and there's bad. So I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know how I feel about it yet. The good thing about that is if we did that, that takes the gloves off, and then we can do things that are going to shake this up, okay? If it's a terrorism organization that allows the U.S. military to do things in Mexico that they can't do today. Now that's good and bad. Do we want the U.S. Air Force dropping bombs in Guadalajara? I don't know how the Mexicans going to feel about it. You got a lot of issues there. So, but it would significantly bring down this problem. But there's a big price to pay on that. So then the other problem that concerns me is right now, there's a weird détente, or there's rules to this, okay? So I'm from New York City, right? Like there were rules with the mob, the Italian mob and law enforcement, there were rules. You don't do certain things. You don't cross these lines. So right now with the cartel in Mexico, there are lines. Like, you don't bring the violence to the United States. So right now, if you're in Laredo, Texas, you can walk around downtown Laredo at 2 o'clock in the morning, and believe me, there's no crime in Laredo. Why? Because the cartel won't allow it. Because if you bring crime to Laredo, you bring a police presence, and that's going to shut down the drugs. Okay? If you cross the border to Nuevo Laredo, it's an absolute war zone. You might as well be in Afghanistan. So the kind of rule is you don't bring that violence. If you bring the violence to Texas, we're coming. And we're coming hard, and we're going to stop the drug trade. And they shot down a helicopter in Laredo. When I was SAC, somebody shot down a customs helicopter. They took rounds, they had to land. Didn't crash, right? Border Patrol closed the border. The FBI pushed into the zone. We locked Laredo down for 3 days, nothing crossed. We sent a message to the cartel. Who shot down the helicopter? We want the guy that shot down the helicopter. So we figured out who it was. We never told the cartel. On day 4, the cartel sent us a note with the right name and said, this guy is at this tree in this park in Laredo, go get him. And we went there, and he was dead, and it was the guy. Because the cartel was like, hey, we didn't sanction, that was not, you're not supposed to shoot down helicopters. And then the border reopened, and they could move all their drugs.
What a positive note.
We can't end there. We gotta bring it around. Anybody got a good question? We gotta end on a good question. Anybody got a good question? All right. He's a friend of mine. He gets
We
there.
got lots of young people, some of them want to go to the FBI. What are the positive reasons for that career of service?
Oh, that's one. Thank you, sir. All right, I'll buy you dinner. How's that? Is that fair? So here's what I would say to everybody, right? Like, hey, like it was like living a movie. Like I even told you half the good stories, right? Like the FBI, it's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful career. It really is like living in a Hollywood movie. It's painful. Like it hurt. Like I did 26 years and it hurt. Like my body's beat up, my family suffered, but man, I would do it again tomorrow because you're saving Americans, you're saving children, like you're making a difference. Nobody knows you're making a difference, but you are, right? It was a wonderful career. The other thing that I would say, because I think we got a pretty diverse group of students here, what I loved about the FBI, nobody cared what you were. Like in today, everybody cares what you are, right? In the FBI, you know what we cared about? How hard you work. I was never in a meeting in 26 years where somebody said, hey, I don't want her on the team because she's a woman, or I don't want him because he's a whatever, right? The first question every time was, and this is how it went, what's his deal? What's her deal? And the answer better be, hey man, she's top notch. And then it was like, all right, get her on the team. Never. And I think that's good. Like, that's what it should be about. It should be about how hard are you working, what are you willing to do for the team. And like, if you're a hard-working person and you want to live a Hollywood movie, you join the FBI. And I'll tell you this, I had a great job in the private sector before I went into the Bureau, and I was not fulfilled. I was fulfilled monetarily, but I was not fulfilled like inside. And I left that job to go to the FBI on a 5-year plan. I said, we're gonna do this for 5 years, I'm gonna see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna go out and make a lot of money. And I was poor for the next 26 years of my life. Man, I loved it. Like, it was just unbelievable. So it's a wonderful, don't listen to the news, don't listen to the pundits, right? Talk to real FBI agents who tell you, like, it's a great job, we're serving America, like, you can make a difference. Like, when you kick in a door because a father is sexually abusing his daughter online, live, and you found him, and you went to the house in San Antonio, and you took the door and you saved that little girl, I'll be poor for the next 26 years. I'm okay with that.
I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for your service, absolutely. I thank you all for being here. Again, if you would help me join in recognizing Chris and all the work you've done. Thank you.